If your girlfriend miraculously survives a horrific accident, don't celebrate just yet. Look deep into her eyes. If that gaze is completely hollow, and she starts doing bizarre things like biting you to test the texture, or standing perfectly still watching you sleep, I have bad news for you. The thing laying next to you every night might not be human anymore.
Listen to me carefully. Have you ever looked at someone you love? Someone you know down to the very rhythm of their heartbeat, and suddenly realized you have absolutely no idea what is hiding behind their eyes? I need to tell you a story. It's my story, and I have to get it out before she wakes up. Or rather, before it stops pretending to sleep. To understand how horrifying my present is, you need to understand how ugly my past was. I am not a perfect victim. In fact, a few years ago, I was the monster in someone else's story. I was a stalker. My ex-girlfriend had to get a restraining order against me because I couldn't let go. I was suffocating, toxic, and dangerously obsessed. I was the guy you warn your daughters about. It took hitting absolute rock bottom, facing jail time, and a terrifying look in the mirror to realize how broken I was. I was mandated to see a therapist, Dr. Price. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She tore down my delusions, forced me to confront my severe attachment issues, and painstakingly helped me rebuild my psyche from the ground up. It took years of grueling therapy, but I changed. I genuinely became a better, healthier person. I learned boundaries. I learned what real love was supposed to look like. Not possession, but partnership. And that was when I met Emma. Emma was everything my dark past didn't deserve. She was soft-spoken, incredibly gentle, and possessed a quiet warmth that made you feel like you were standing in a patch of sunlight. She was an aspiring fantasy writer, always lost in worlds of dragons, magic, and epic romances. Her apartment smelled like old paper, lavender, and vanilla. She loved me with a purity that terrified me. When things started getting serious, I knew I had to come clean. I sat her down on my worn-out sofa, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold my coffee mug, and I laid out all my ugly pieces. I told her about my ex, the stalking, the restraining order, the toxicity, and the years with Dr. Price. I braced myself for her to walk out the door. But Emma just reached across the table, took my shaking hands in hers, and looked at me with those deep, empathetic brown eyes. "I don't care about the man you were," she said softly. "I love the man sitting in front of me right now." It was the happiest day of my life. I finally felt like I had outrun my demons. I had a future. 6 months later, that future was ripped to shreds in the Appalachian Mountains. Emma's parents owned a remote cabin deep in the woods, miles away from cell service. They invited her for a weekend getaway to celebrate her father's retirement. I had to stay behind for work, so I kissed her goodbye on a Friday morning, telling her I'd see her on Sunday. Sunday came, but Emma didn't. Instead, I got a phone call at 2:00 a.m. from a county sheriff. His voice was grim, heavy with that specific tone authorities use when they have to deliver nightmares. There had been an accident at the cabin. An animal attack. He said it was a bear, a massive, Rogue Grizzly. Judging by the sheer destruction of the cabin doors and the state of the bodies, Emma's parents didn't make it. They were torn apart. But Emma is alive, the sheriff said. She managed to hide. We found her wandering the woods a few miles from the property. She's physically unharmed. But son, you need to get down to the hospital. She's not talking. I drove 5 hours through the dead of night, my mind racing with a sickening blend of relief and terror. When I finally reached the sterile, fluorescent, lit hospital room, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed. She didn't have a single scratch on her. Not a bruise. Not a drop of blood. But when I ran to hug her, she didn't react. Her body was stiff. Her arms hung limply at her sides. When she finally looked up at me, my breath caught in my throat. Her beautiful, expressive brown eyes were totally flat. They looked like glass marbles. The doctors called it severe trauma, induced amnesia. They said her brain had completely shut down to protect her from the horror of watching her parents die. They told me it would take time, patience, and a lot of care to bring her back. I swore I would do whatever it took. After all, she had accepted my dark past. I would pull her through hers. I brought her home. That was my first mistake. The first few days were a quiet kind of hell. She didn't speak. She just sat wherever I placed her, staring blankly at the wall. I spoon-fed her, bathed her and brushed her hair. I told myself it was just shock. But by the second week, amnesia started manifesting in ways that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It started with the touching. We were sitting on the couch watching TV. Suddenly, she leaned over and grabbed my arm. Her grip was startlingly strong, much stronger than Emma had ever been. Before I could ask what she was doing, she leaned down and bit my forearm. It wasn't an aggressive bite, not meant to tear flesh, but a firm, calculating pressure, like a dog testing the durability of a bone.
Emma!
I gasped, pulling my arm away. She didn't blink. She just stared at the faint teeth marks on my skin, then slowly extended a bizarrely long, wet tongue and licked the spot she had just bitten. She tasted my skin, smacked her lips quietly, and turned back to the television. No emotion. No apology. Just gathering data. Then came the nights. Emma used to be a notoriously heavy sleeper. But now, she didn't seem to sleep at all. One night, about 3 weeks after the accident, I woke up shivering. The blanket had been pulled off me. I rolled over, half asleep, and my heart nearly exploded out of my chest. Emma was standing perfectly still in the pitch black corner of the bedroom. She wasn't sleepwalking. Her eyes were wide open, locked entirely on my face. She was just watching me. "Baby," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer. She just slowly tilted her head, maintaining unbroken eye contact, and then silently climbed back into bed. She lay flat on her back, pulled the covers up to her chin, and closed her eyes. I stayed awake until the sun came up, listening to her breathing. It was too perfectly rhythmic. Inhale for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. Exactly the same, every single time. The doctors had said she would have to relearn basic tasks, and she did. But she learned them too fast. One afternoon, I tried to teach her how to scramble eggs. The old Emma was a terrible cook. She always burned the butter. I showed this new Emma how to crack the egg, how to whisk it, how to manage the heat. She watched my hands with an intense, unblinking focus. "Now you try," I said. She took the eggs. She didn't fumble. She moved with mechanical, terrifying precision. She recreated my exact movements down to the millimeter. The angle of the whisk, the twist of the wrist, the adjustment of the stove dial. It was flawless. But when I offered her a bite, she chewed it once, swallowed it whole without tasting it, and walked out of the kitchen. She wasn't remembering how to be human. She was simulating it. She was observing human behavior and downloading it into whatever was operating behind her eyes. The final straw. The thing that finally broke my denial happened yesterday. I thought maybe getting her back into her writing would help spark her soul. I booted up her laptop and opened her manuscript file. It was a beautiful fantasy story she had been working on for 2 years, full of poetry and emotion. I sat her at the desk and told her to read it, hoping it would trigger a memory. I left the room to take a shower. When I came back 30 minutes later, she was typing. But the sound wasn't normal. It sounded like a machine gun. Her fingers were flying across the keyboard at a speed no human being could maintain, striking the keys with brutal. "Emma," I called out. She immediately stopped. Her hands froze mid-air. She slowly closed the laptop, stood up, and walked past me into the living room without a word. My stomach tied itself into a cold, heavy knot. I walked over to the desk. My hands shaking just like they did on the day I confessed my past to her. I opened the laptop. She hadn't been writing her novel. The document was deleted. Instead, the screen was open to her web browser. I looked at her search history. The blood drained from my face, and a profound, paralyzing dread washed over me. I felt like the floor had opened up beneath my feet. The search queries from the last 30 minutes read normal human body temperature range. How many hours must a human sleep to appear healthy? Anatomy of the human jaw. How to replicate human facial expressions of empathy. Average decay rate of biological matter in a mountain climate. What does a human female sound like when laughing? How to digest raw meat without vomiting. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my terrified eyes. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. The bear that destroyed the cabin. The parents torn apart. The girl found wandering the woods without a single scratch. Devoid of all memories, lacking a soul, learning how to mimic my girlfriend's step by step. Emma didn't survive the attack. Emma died in that cabin with her parents. Whatever survived, whatever came back in her skin, is sitting in my living room right now. Suddenly, the floorboard creaked right behind me. I froze. The room dropped 10 degrees. I didn't have to turn around to know she was standing in the doorway. Is something wrong? The voice belonged to Emma. It sounded exactly like her. But the inflection was completely flat, an audio file playing back a learned phrase. I slowly closed the laptop. My heart is hammering against my ribs so hard. I'm afraid she can hear it. I have to turn around now. I have to look at the thing wearing the face of the woman I loved. And I have to smile. And I have to pretend I don't know. Because if it finds out that I know, I don't think it will need to keep pretending to be human anymore.
Welcome back. You survived our first descent into the dark, but it seems the shadows have a way of pulling you right back in. For our second tale tonight, we are leaving the safety of dry land behind. We're heading far out into the freezing, pitch black, and uncharted waters of the North Atlantic. They say the ocean hides her darkest secrets well at the bottom of the abyss, but sometimes she spits them back out. So, turn off your lights, pull the blankets tight, and before we begin, make sure you count exactly how many people are in the room with you right now. You might want to check again when the story is over.
14 years. That is exactly how long I've been breathing the suffocating diesel fumes and the stench of gutted cod on the deck of the Margaret Ann. My life was measured not in days, but in the head count. I was the tally man. An old superstition taught me the ocean is a jealous mistress, always looking to steal a careless soul. So I counted every single morning and every night around the galley table. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 men. Captain Elias, O'Brien in the kitchen, Big Dan in the engine room, Tommy and Miller on the winches, and me. For 14 years, the roster never changed. I knew them like my own calloused hands. Until we pulled that absolute nightmare up from the dark. It happened on a miserable Tuesday twilight. The radar pinged a massive school, so we dropped our nets deep, hitting a black, uncharted trench 800 feet down. When the winches engaged, the motors screamed. The steel cables groaned against an impossible dead weight. As it broke the turbulent surface, we realized it wasn't fish. The smell hit us first. It smelled like a stagnant crypt, ozone, decayed meat, and a sickly sweetness. Suspended above the deck, tangled violently in the mesh, was a hideous mass. It was roughly the size of a bloated human corpse, wrapped tightly in black kelp and coated in a glowing, viscous slime. "Dump it," Captain Elias barked. "Get that garbage off my deck." But the main winch motor seized. We couldn't lower it or drop it back into the crashing ocean. The fierce storm hit us with its full force. Defeated, we tied the net down against the deck, planning to dump the carcass at first light. That was our fatal mistake. We brought it aboard. We gave it a place to rest. The next morning, the storm had broken, leaving behind a suffocating white fog. The ocean was dead calm. I was the first out on the deck, holding my coffee, ready to take a hacksaw to the cables. But when I reached the stern, my mug slipped from my frozen fingers and shattered. The net was entirely empty. The industrial mesh looked melted from the inside out. The corpse-like mass was gone. In its place was a terrifying trail. A wide smear of that fall, smelling slime led straight from the torn net, dragged across the wooden planks, and disappeared right at the steel threshold of the crew's living quarters. Something hadn't just fallen out. Something had crawled out. I rushed inside, expecting a panic. But the ship was disturbingly quiet. O'Brien was humming, frying eggs. Dan was sipping coffee, reading a newspaper. I frantically told them about the torn net and the slime trail. They just stared blankly. Probably washed over in the swells, bud. Stop jumping at shadows. Dan grunted. But the horrifying signs were everywhere. I found damp, gray handprints on the rusted bulkhead. They looked human, but the fingers were entirely too long, the joints bending at sickening, impossible angles. Then, the behavior changed. I walked into the mess hall and saw Tommy sitting silently in the corner, staring blankly at the metal wall. He didn't blink once. He just sat there, mechanically moving his jaw up and down, making a soft, wet clicking sound deep in his throat. When I called his name, his neck snapped toward me with a violent motion. A wide, unnatural smile stretched across his face, exposing far too many teeth. "Just practicing, buddy," he said. His voice sounded like a distorted recording playing through a broken, underwater radio. That evening, I sat in the leather chair near the navigation table. The bridge had been empty for hours. But when I sat down, the leather was sweltering hot. Something had just been sitting there in the pitch dark for hours. Not working, not sleeping, just absorbing the heat. Sitting. Waiting. Observing. I couldn't shake the creeping dread that something on this boat was actively learning how to be human. It was dinner time, when the nightmare truly set in. Breaking my fragile mind, I stood at the end of the galley table and began my daily ritual. 1. Captain Elias. 2. O'Brien. 3. Big Dan. 4. Tommy. 5. Me. I stopped counting. Frowning at the empty chair at the far end of the table. "Hey," I called out. "Where's Miller?" Absolute silence fell over the entire table. The clinking of silverware stopped. Captain Elias slowly looked up, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "Who?" "Miller," I said, letting out a breathless chuckle. "Tall guy. Terrible jokes. Sleeps in the bunk directly below me. Where is he?" O'Brien wiped his hands on a greasy apron. "I don't know what kind of sick joke you're playing, son, but there ain't no one named Miller on this boat. Never has been." I stood up so fast that my heavy iron chair scraped violently against the floorboards. "What the hell are you talking about? There are 6 of us! There have always been 6 of us!" I jabbed my trembling finger at the empty wooden chair. 6! "Sit down and eat your damn food," Captain Elias commanded, his voice layered with a sickening amount of pity. "It's just the 5 of us on this crew." "It's always been just the 5 of us." I turned and sprinted down the dimly lit hallway to the corkboard, where we pinned up the crew Polaroids. I frantically snatched the picture from last Christmas in Boston. My breath hitched in my throat. My vision rapidly blurred. There were only 5 men smiling in the photograph. The physical space where Miller used to stand laughing was seamlessly closed up. He wasn't just mysteriously missing from the boat. He was completely missing from the photograph. He was missing from the past itself. panic clawing at my throat, I sprinted down into the lower sleeping quarters. I forcefully ripped back the privacy curtain to my bunk area. I sleep on the top bunk. Miller sleeps on the bottom. I looked down in sheer horror. There was no bottom bunk. There was just a solid wooden storage drawer, built seamlessly into the floor beneath my mattress. The metal frame where his bed used to sit for 8 years was now solid steel bulkhead. His personal locker was gone. His clothes were completely gone. It was exactly as if Miller had never existed in the history of the universe. I didn't sleep a single second that agonizing night. I sat pressed tightly into the darkest corner of the room, clutching a heavy iron wrench. Deep down, I knew exactly what we pulled out of that pitch black ocean. It wasn't a monster that hunted you down in the dark and tore your flesh. That would be quick and merciful. No, this terrifying thing was an apex predator of reality itself. A cosmic, impossible parasite. It didn't just consume your physical body, it consumed your entire history. Your very presence in the world. It learned your personal mannerisms, took your specific place in the social order, and then cleanly erased the original version from the fabric of existence. It had taken Miller. It had fully digested his life. And it had smoothed over the jagged edges of reality so perfectly that no one else on board even noticed the missing puzzle piece. The universe just seamlessly stitched itself shut around the bleeding hole where my best friend used to be. But why did I remember him? Was it because I was the dedicated counter? Because my brain was obsessively hardwired for 14 long years to look for the number 6. The very next day, the true horror escalated. I started noticing the horrifying changes happening within myself. I was out on the freezing deck, trying to repair the damaged winch cable. A jagged piece of rusted steel wire suddenly snapped backward and sliced deep across the palm of my hand. I squeezed my eyes shut, letting out a cry, waiting for the searing agony to hit me. But there was absolutely no pain. I fearfully opened my eyes and pulled my trembling fingers apart. There was a deep, ugly gash spanning my entire palm, but it wasn't bleeding a single drop. Instead of red blood and pink muscle, the tissue beneath my skin looked gray, hollow, and dry, heavily resembling old papier chiche and dead dust. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. I stumbled backward and ran blindly into the ship's cramped bathroom. I slammed the heavy metal door shut, bolted the lock, and gripped the edges of the dirty porcelain sink. I stared intensely into the cracked mirror. I looked exactly like myself. I blinked my eyes. The reflection in the mirror didn't blink at the exact same time. It deliberately stayed open for a fraction of a second longer, staring coldly back at me with calculating, completely hollow eyes before its eyelids finally shuttered down and back up. It was out of sync. I was out of sync. That was exactly when the paralyzing truth crashed over me. The horrific creature hadn't just replaced Miller. It was a fluid, endlessly adapting entity. It had realized that replacing just one man wasn't nearly enough to secure its disguise. Not as long as there was someone left who remembered the anomaly. It wasn't just digesting Miller anymore. It was actively digesting me. It was slowly, methodically taking over my physical form, my treasured memories, my very existence. The unnatural numbness in my hand, the terrifying delay in the mirror. I was being hollowed out, meticulously replaced by a perfect, empty copy from the inside out. And as it slowly took me over, the authentic me was being quietly pushed out of reality forever. I slowly unlocked the door and walked back into the mess hall, moving silently like an invisible ghost. The rest of the crew was cheerfully eating a hot breakfast. I stood frozen at the doorway. "Captain?" I croaked, my dry voice echoing like it was coming from the dark bottom of a deep well. Elias didn't look up from his hot coffee. "Hey, Dan." I tried again, desperately reaching out a shaking hand. O'Brien walked right past me to grab the salt shaker. He didn't even brush my shoulder. He didn't flinch. It was exactly as if I was made of thin air. He set a large plate of crispy bacon down on the center of the wooden table. There were only 4 plates set on the table. I looked frantically at the crew. They were laughing, joking. Tommy was energetically telling a lively story. There were only 4 men sitting at that table. 1, 2, 3, 4. A cold, absolute terror washed over me. I opened my mouth and tried to scream, to flip the heavy table, but absolutely no sound came out. My transparent hands could no longer grip the solid wood. I looked down at my own fingers, and they were rapidly beginning to turn translucent, shimmering and fracturing like oil spilling on water. The terrifying thing we pulled from the deep. It is finally done learning. It had successfully worn Miller's face, and now it is perfectly wearing mine. It is permanently taking my place on the Margaret Ann. In a few days, it will casually walk off this boat, step confidently onto the docks in Boston, and live my entire life. It will hug my mother. It will cash my paychecks, and no one will ever know the difference. Because I will never have existed. The precious memories are actively fading from my mind, even as I speak these final words. My own consciousness is rapidly slipping away into a dark, suffocating fog. I can't remember the small town where I was born anymore. I can't even remember the color of my own eyes. All I have left is this fleeting, agonizing moment of awareness, trapped forever in the fading echo of who I used to be. I'm frantically projecting these final words into the void before the absolute dark takes me completely. I don't want to disappear. Please. God, I don't want to become nothing. I can feel the crushing pressure of the ocean floor creeping steadily into my chest. The count is down to 4, and soon it will be right back to 5. But I won't be one of them. If you are somehow hearing this, if my frantic voice is somehow still echoing in some forgotten crack of this broken reality, I beg of you, if you still remember me, please tell me what my name is.